My reason
Gentleman
for
Ross
picking
Packard.
a particular topic is because the FDA has a guidance document that was released in 2016 on human factors, but they don't follow it. And they published a draft guidance that says this is draft and this is non-binding, but they're enforcing parts of it. So I'd like to see them come up with a new final guidance. And just like the cybersecurity process took about 6 years to get a final guidance that was appropriate, and then another 6 months before they had a template to put the information in, I think the same is going to happen for the human factors side, maybe even a little slower because we haven't had a major international scandal about it. But I think it's going to take a while, and I think we need to give maybe a little input to the FDA. So I have very strong opinions, but I do this all the time. And I'm curious what other people might have as opinions as what should be in a guidance document.
We haven't
And
had a
so,
major international scandal yet.
yes, I'm very much hoping that we have a class 1 recall caused by use errors, but I'm not allowed to talk about that. So the first item on the list here is, well, the first item on the list is if you have any suggestions that you don't have an opportunity to share, or you think of it afterwards, if you can please go visit my suggestion portal, that would
I'll
be
type that
awesome.
out for the folks now.
It's medicaldeviceacademy.com/suggestion-portal. And if you misspell it, but you find my website, that's okay, because the 404 page is also the suggestion portal.
Just typed it in for the folks.
Awesome, thank you. These are the top 10 things I'm thinking of. I'll go through each one, but I'm fishing for your suggestions on what should be in the guidance document. And so that gives you a little glimpse at the future. So number 1 on the list right now, their idea of telling you where to put the information is we'll hide it in a help button and bury it in there. They don't even bold it. They don't underline it. It says right here, usability, human factors studies. And they tell you if it's one that you're going to do as part of a clinical study, put it in one place. And if it's not part of a clinical study, put it in a different place. But when you look in those places, it just says add attachment. It doesn't say what kind of attachment. The only reference is clinical or non-clinical. It doesn't mention anything about human factors. So you're not sure that you got it in the right place. And then when you go to the non-IVD, that's even further down the list on like page 40. And you have to click on the help button again, and you have to read to the bottom. So they want to attach all of these things, but they don't give you a button for any of them with any labels. So their idea is we'll just give you an add attachment button, but you got to check on the help button to figure out what's supposed to be attached. So people ask me all the time, where do we put this stuff? So I show them, and I show them where it can be found. But unless somebody points it out to you or you open up every single help button, you will never know. So anybody have any comments on the where the hell do I attach it suggestion for a guidance? Nobody. Okay. It's a quiet crowd.
I mean, could it be like the cybersecurity where they have the 12 different things that you got to load up? I mean, similar to
That's
that.
exactly what I want them to do. Exactly. I would love for them to do that. And they could try this novel concept, like actually doing a screen capture and say, attach here. That's just an idea. But you're thinking along the lines I am. That's exactly what I think they ought to do, is what they did in the cybersecurity guidance. The second question I had was the human factors documentation that's needed. Sometimes companies say, well, why do I need to provide anything human factors? This is identical to my competitor product. This is a 510K. It's identical to the predicate. The user interface is the same. It's a low risk device. Why do I have to do anything for human factors? Why do I have to spend 10, 20, 30, 50, $100,000 to do a human factors study when it's identical? So, for example, it's a forceps. We've been using the same tool for the last couple centuries here. It's still a forceps. It hasn't changed. You squeeze it and it picks things up. Why do I need to do human factors study on this? But they actually ask for this sometimes. And so anything that has a graphic user interface, so a touch screen, a button, a knob, they say you have to provide a usability study for that. And they came up with the idea of a flow chart, a decision tree, saying we're going to divide it into category 1, category 2, category 3. And depending on where you end up in the decision tree, you may or may not have to provide human factors documentation. Decision trees are sometimes hard for people to follow, but the FDA uses them a lot. What are your thoughts on using this approach, or is there a better way that we could use to document whether you need to provide human factors documentation or not?
Hey, Rob, just a thought. Normally you see this is sort of backwards. That's the reason I'm one of those in the camp that I don't really like the flowcharts because they are a bit confusing and you can logically go to the wrong place. Whereas if you turn it around and say your category 1, category 3 are this, kind of like what you have in the EUMDR. Let's start with the categories. Here's the definition of the categories. You make the decision where you are, and then you give justification as to why you believe that category based on what the definitions are. Makes a lot more sense to me.
That's exactly what they do in the software section, either your basic or your enhanced. If your basic category, you attach your justification for why you're basic, and it only gives you certain things to attach. If you're enhanced, you don't have to provide a justification because that's the higher risk category and everything is required. So depending on how you answered their first question, basic or enhanced documentation, and whether you attach something or not, that determines what comes next. And that's how the FDA E-Star is designed. They would just have to design one that's a specific question that asks you which category you're in for human factors. So is this identical to your predicate? Is it different from your predicate? And then they could have this other category that they've actually concentrated on here, which is if it's a modification of your own device.
Yeah, it almost seems like it's a pick and choose kind of thing. Much like you have on any other kind of wizard. If you're going to be walking through the system, make your choices and give your reasoning for those choices, and it can all be coded. That's the nice part about this, is if you choose a category and then you click a radio button that says this is my reason or reasons, if you happen to have more than one, then you automatically get thrown into a certain way of doing the human factors kind of reasoning all the way through the rest of the E-Star. It just starts with the definition. If you could do that, then you would eliminate a lot of the extraneous stuff, but it just seems like somebody's got to sit and go through that logic to make sure that, if you start this way, here's all you have to fill out. If you start this way, here's all you have to fill out.
And I think it probably takes the person coding probably all of an hour to show a demo of here's what it would look like with this. You click on the drop down category 1, category 2, and that decides where you go. To demo that would only take them an hour of time, and then they could actually show a screen capture of that in the guidance document instead of a decision tree that most people have trouble understanding. So it's, if you're category 1, you'll click yes, and this is what will show up. If you're category 2, then you click, then you have this shows up instead, and this is how you answer them. Sort of a chapter book in software form, but if they showed screen captures of the software as planned, they could have it not enabled, or they could have it not released, and if they could enable it overnight once people agree on the guidance. And they're supposed to have this mandatory period of comment on guidance of 6 months, but they've gotten in trouble recently for not doing that. So I think their solution is we just won't release guidance. So thank you for that input. At least I know I'm not the only one that hates decision trees.
I just want to concur with that, especially when you've got clients that like to read the guidance documents for themselves and then argue with you about the decisions, because they are only going through the flow chart and they're not going through actually reading the text of the guidance document that goes with that point on the decision tree. So I think, flowcharts are probably helpful for people like us, but That's because we actually read the guidance document and we know the context of the decision. So anyways,
Yep.
I think one of the hard things too is just that, like the key word in that flow chart, like I like flow charts, I'm an engineer, that's kind of how my brain works, but is that critical tasks, right? And that
Mhm.
stuff like that, what's always challenging is that there's an element of subjectivity in that, right? As you're doing,
Yes.
of course, that's rooted on your risk analysis, but even your risk analysis, I've always found that that's the part that's hard for me as an engineer, is when you're really trying to think of the probabilities of harm or something like that. You're like, you're sticking your finger up in the air. If it's a brand new product, you don't have that data that you can point to. So you're really trying to make a subjective decision. I don't know if you're tackling this later on in the call, but I'd love to get your thoughts on critical tasks and,
That is going to be part of this presentation a little bit later on, but you're absolutely right. People will try to game the system by saying, well, if I scored as a 3 instead of a 4, then it's not critical. Or if I scored a 2 instead of a 3, it's not critical. And the FDA always disagrees.
All right, cool. Hey, can you go into full presentation mode? The text is a little bit small. It's kind of hard to see.
Yep, I will do that. Hmm. Gotta switch which screen is showing it.
Question?
Hey, Michelle.
Now we see your Gmail.
Yeah, I'm gonna fix that.
There should be that little button on the lower right of the PowerPoint screen.
Yes, and it lets me do that no problem when I'm the host, but when I'm a guest, it doesn't want me to do that correctly.
Let me see.
Yes.
So how do I switch?
There, you're the host now. Hi, Ben, you got something?
Rob, bottom right-hand corner, just use the little icon.
The right-hand corner, you said?
Bottom right-hand corner. You see looks like you're pulling the screen down?
One to the right, one to the right, to the
One
right.
more. There you go, slideshow. That should do it.
Do it another healthy click.
No.
Or proceed as
I
you
think
want.
I'm just gonna change what my share is. So I'm sharing screen 2.
Oh, how about up there, up top, it says, from current slide, all the way top left, okay.
Nice.
I think we're good now. You agree?
Okay. Okay.
I
Rob,
did it.
question in between. Can I ask you something?
Yes.
Human factors, is that a typical FDA term? Because I'm used to usability engineering. Where does it fit in?
I'm having trouble understanding what you're asking because the signal's breaking up.
Oh, I'm sorry. It could be my headset.
Yeah. it's okay.
Where does the human factors fit in usability engineering?
I'm still having trouble
Just from
understanding
a
what you said.
terminology, human factors versus usability.
Thank
Those
you,
two
Jose.
terms
So in the IEC 62366 standard, they actually define usability engineering and human factors, and they make it very clear in that IEC 62366 standard that the two terms are interchangeable. They both mean the same thing. So it's perfectly acceptable to call it human factors engineering or usability engineering. They mean exactly the same thing. But in general, the Europeans use the term usability most of the time. And generally, the FDA usually uses the term human factors. But I hear both parties switching back and forth. In fact, in the MDR in Annex 1, they mention ergonomics, which almost nobody talks about.
If you allow me, dear Rob, very short, my professor in Uni Münster in Germany was one of the fathers of the Gebrauchstauglichkeit norm, ergonomy on medical devices. So there are synonyms, these words practically.
Yes.
Yeah.
This next question I had here was, would it be beneficial to have a process flow diagram? And the example of what I was thinking of as a process flow diagram was what we have for risk management, which is on the left-hand side. And there is a new, and I will say relatively new because it's 2019, there is a TIR 57 guidance that's also in SW 96 from AAMI on a security process flow chart. And they modeled it obviously off of the risk management, but it's for security assessments and security risks. And they wanted to keep it as close to the risk management process as possible. The only things that really seem to be missing from it is the risk management plan is over here on the left, and it's not on the security risk flow. And of course, you would want a usability plan, but they've kind of left that out of IEC 62362 366 as well. It's not very clear that you need a plan, but it is a very similar process from my perspective. You identify what the requirements are, you do analysis, you try different options, you finalize and implement your risk controls for usability, and then you do post-market surveillance to see if you have any use errors or have additional problems from a usability standpoint. So I think it would be very easy to adapt this for usability, but nobody's done that. And I was wondering if that actually helps anybody think about usability as a process and how to implement for that in parallel with their design and risk management activities.
Hey, Rob, a lot of this stuff is evolutionary, much like what happened with MDD to MDR. A lot more companies weren't really sure what the commission wanted, so they were just throwing everything at it, saying you have to do everything no matter what it was, and got this big convoluted thing. And then only within the last 3 years, I guess, BSI came out with its own checklist of exactly what it wants for its technical file, and that's kind of what everybody has settled on. And the commission says, hey, we're okay with that. So I think it really has to come down to industry has to secure using something like this, and it makes sense. And then as an industry, just start using this, and then the commission will say, hey, that's a really good idea, but it's going to take sitting down with people like us who are doing this sort of thing to say, we need this, we need to put something like this in place. But I just don't know how many opportunities there are to have this kind of feedback to say, this is needed, this is necessary, you should do this, it should be aligned, should be standardized. Let's get everything working similarly across the board. But I don't know how many opportunities you might have to be sitting with the commission or anybody else, any other regulatory agency.
I happen to be good friends with people that actually talk with the commission on a regular basis. Greg Jones is head of BSI's medical division. He's a good friend of mine. He and I used to audit together all the time. There's a lot of influential people in Europe that are still influencing what goes in those regulations and how they're interpreted and what goes in the MDCG guidance. So I do know those people. And on the US side, I personally know Hannah B. Wire at the FDA who's making a lot of the policies on usability. So I think I know the right people. I just want to go to them with a guidance that's a draft that people like and people think are good. So I'm in the process of actually creating my own guidance document and going to make it available to people. Hey, this is how we think you ought to be doing usability and human factors, and how you ought to document it. And present it as a draft guidance to the FDA, make it public, and see how people like it, don't like it, adopt it, don't adopt it. But I do have the connections to share it on a regular basis. I just don't have the guidance. And before I created one, I wanted to get input from people that actually know something about this. I tried the waiting and persuading approach, and I've been doing that for over 2 years now. And I'm not waiting for them anymore. I'm going to create my own.
I hear you. I did the same thing back in 2019 when we were waiting for the MD. Everybody having to get in line with the May 2019 MDR directives. I had created my own technical file activities. I had an entire Microsoft project of every activity that was needing to be done in order of phase 1, phase 2, phase 3. We're at input, output, verification, validation, transfer to manufacturing. I had all of those listed out, had every activity, I mean, down to the micro activity, all the way down the list, and it was way too much, but it was what the commission wanted at the time. So in creating my own, I went way overboard to have too much, and it was only after BSI published their stuff to say, well, we're directly talking to the commission. We know how much we get away with, because they were kind of working with the customers to say, what's the least amount we can get them to do to actually be in line and say, we can accept this sort of thing. So it may be one of those cases where you come up with yours, like mine, way too detailed, way too much, way too, granular, and then let somebody take that, like a BSI, like a Tooth Soothe, like a Interdec, Decra, somebody in that line who's actually saying, well, we're going to work with the commission, but we're also going to work with our customers, and let them sort of take the ball. You're initiating it, which is great, because we all know from our standpoint, if we're going to help the customers, if it's something easy and standardized, I want to be able to use that, and I want to be able to get that to my customer and say, customer, this is all you have to do. You don't have to go all the way to the unreasonable, illogical ends to get things done. But somebody's got to start the ball, and I appreciate you're actually being one of those people that starts the ball rolling with thinking this way.
I'm familiar with what you're talking about from BSI. They did the same thing when they were doing clinical evaluation reports before the MedDev was created for clinical evaluation reports. Jane Rounds had just left BSI, and they asked her as a consultant to create one for people, and she created a draft. It became MedDev, and now that's pretty much what everybody uses. Is the latest guidance on how to do clinical evaluations came from that one specific person, but she was hired as a consultant to do it, and she was in a perfect position to do it because she had worked at BSI on that, and she knew a lot of the people in MHRA, so she had an opportunity to ask the right people, what do you think, to share a draft. Your idea of a checklist with specific deliverables, that's actually one of the items I have here later on, but I was curious if anybody had input on flowcharts. Like them, hate them, have a better example.
I don't know if this is applicable for this, but a lot of times when I had to use flowcharts to create new processes in manufacturing development, the flowcharts would be linked out to the relevant part of the procedure. Just having looked at some procedures, that would be strictly an electronic document thing. But I know it helped me developing the procedures, and it was probably helpful for people trying to explain it, especially if their knowledge of the procedure is imperfect.
Mm-hmm. Okay. If anybody can think of other flowcharts that are out there in a guidance somewhere that they think is a really good one, other than these two that are obviously very similar, I'd love other examples. I've come up with all kinds of flowcharts myself, but sometimes they just get too complicated.
Personally, dear Rob, I use templates from Yonner Institute, which are really very understandable. And it is really not so difficult if you start clean to from the beginning, to implement one clean usability engineering by defining the user interface, what exactly that is, which user groups you have, which use scenarios you have, taking really from A, B to Z, yeah, not forgetting anything.
I was actually looking at one of theirs for Agile and Scrum, and I was thinking about using that diagram where it showed an iterative loop as the part in the middle that's the development where you're doing formative testing. And so adapting that same methodology and that same kind of diagram. So I like your thinking. So I'll look at some more of the templates from the Yonner Institute. I think they're very good.
Yes.
So thank you.
If you allow just one pragmatic description of the situation. For many years, it has not been really deep understood, the usability norm. That means notified bodies under MDG times came and they have seen the tech files that they have done just one evaluation, but not, of course, exactly like the norm, yeah? Formative evaluation, summative. But now under MDR, the things are, of course, strict. And as we know altogether, only with one clean usability engineering file, you have also clean risk management.
Mm-hmm. Thank you very much. That's really good feedback. Probability scoring is one area we had talked about a little bit earlier. You know, should I score this a 2 or a 3? Do do you think it would be helpful to have some detailed examples or guidance on how to score things in terms of severity or probability? And the FDA has said they don't want you to include probability in their use-related risk analysis. The Europeans have said you shall because it's in 14971. And I had the opportunity to ask decision makers, and they said absolutely no way would we ever accept something that didn't have probability as acceptable for usability. We will let you have usability, or I'm sorry, they said probability could be 1 in software because 62304 is state of the art and it says so. But we still want you to show the probability as 1. So we want to see a risk analysis has probability, even if it's 1 for every single item. But for usability, no, that wouldn't be acceptable. So, and that's opposite of what the FDA does. So we have a conflict that we can't really resolve. But I was curious if anybody had any suggestions out there as to a good guidance on, like, what's the best way to explain to somebody how to score something?
I was doing some of that with respect to FMEAs, and of course we've gone through all of that. But sometimes I find that the probability number is interactive to a degree with the severity. And I also find that the probability number can have some interaction with the detection number. And that's just in FMEAs.
Yeah.
And so
my suggestion will, excuse
yeah.
me.
Well, what I meant by that was that if you've got something that is very likely to happen, of course that will, but it's a little less severe, that's still going to have an equivalent amount of risk, but it is different in character from something that is extremely severe, but less likely to happen, but may give you the same kind of number. And so very often I would evaluate them separately. And it was nearly impossible to get a good evaluation without assessing probability. It would actually change the nature of sometimes detection and the severity, producing different modes of instability.
Okay. I have in a later slide that I'm going to talk about that specifically, the FMEAs, but I think Alex had another comment. Or actually, and Goldie's raising her hand too.
Yes, I wanted just to say, I met also these different definitions under the scalas, let's say. The safe way is that you follow what exactly the 2019 14971 says. Also, the templates from well-known, let's say, agencies, they are up to date. So you can use the important is that you have, how can I say, across all the risk management documents, the same scala. So if you use one scala and the definitions are here, this one, and or there is one differentiation in the name of one from one other template from another agency, it's not so worse, but it is important that it is as we say in German, einheitlich, so symmetrical in all of the risk management documents. That is what I do in these cases, yeah.
Okay. This is actually a screen capture from 24971 when it was still a draft, but thank you. Goldie, what were you gonna add?
I just a comment, risk management goes much deeper, design evaluation from probability perspective. Whereas usability, when I do these studies, and I have several with and gone through the 510K clearance, the one FDA is looking for is close calls. And they are looking for what would user do if they are confused and if that will lead into patient harm. So probability in my mind is really when you are connecting hazards from your file, either FMEA or risk file, to your user interface related risk in usability study. The focus is, for me, the focus has been close calls. When we are observing them to do something and they are confused and we are not allowed to interfere, what they are doing, but we are asked to write that would they have made a mistake because your user interface is confusing for the user. And FDA has been interested in that. Yeah.
Yep. Yeah, the FDA always wants to know if they had any difficulty. So I agree with that. That's very helpful.
Thank you.
The next item I had on here was we've had quite a few OTC products, that over-the-counter products that have been submitted to the FDA, and their expectations for usability on an OTC product are very different. And they do have a guidance for drugs, but they don't have a guidance for devices. And how they want to do it seems to be very specific. And I'm wondering if people think it would be helpful to have it be included in the same guidance, or they think it would be more appropriate to have OTC guidance to be separate from the usability, even though you'd be specifically talking about how to do usability for OTC devices.
Excuse me. Rob, What an are the administrative OTC note. devices? Do we lose you at the top of the hour?
I can go a
Robert?
little bit longer than that. That's not a problem.
Okay. Show of hands, do people need to drop off at the top of the hour? Just, okay, well,
Totally
that was a physical hand holding. All right, so we should be able to continue. Go ahead.
I do think it would be helpful. I think a section of the guidance is probably acceptable. I think examples are always what's most helpful. Like I know in the cybersecurity documents, it's really helpful for them to kind of list out like, hey, if you've got any of this kind of connectivity, you're a cyber device. And, and they actually give you an example around a thermometer, like a wireless thermometer, which I think most people would be like, you don't need any cybersecurity on that. And they're like, no, you do. It's just, we're going to have a much lower bar because we recognize that the risk is a lot lower. So I think that the more examples they give, the greater the clarity that you're able to gather.
Yep.
A section of the guidance is probably sufficient versus a separate guidance altogether.
Okay. Yeah, I ran into, probably, it was unfortunate that's how it happened, but the first example I ran into was genetic testing, and they have a prescriptive regulation that says how you shall do it that isn't probably representative of any other type of product that's OTC. But I think it's unique to genetic testing. And I like the example of thermometers and blood pressure cuffs, things that people are very familiar with as a vital signs monitoring device. But there are other examples out there that we could use that might be OTC. Alex, did you have something else?
Yes, our aim is always to meet the 2019 version of the risk management standard is to clarify in the end the foreseeable misuse errors. Only if you reach this level to clarify which are these misuse errors, then you fulfill really the 2019 version. And this is it's not difficult really that to reach if you follow exactly the steps which the templates guides you, and then you have the correct use because you have clean defined what the user scenarios are, the user interface, and it stays practically from this whole process approach what the misuse cases are. And this is the baby, the end result, this misuse cases, what this version likes to see. And then you have practically, as you mentioned before, the residual risks, and you must explain how you mitigate the residual risks. Exactly. Yeah.
I agree completely with that approach, using the different use cases and defining what your use environment is and who the user groups are. However, the FDA for OTC products, when they do usability, they want something very different.
Okay.
And they actually want something in addition to your normal studies. They want a precursor that verifies that the number one, they're looking for literacy or the ability to read and understand the instructions. They're not just accepting a simple readability score. And second of all, they're looking for the ability for the OTC potential customer to self-select as the intended user. And so they want a specific study design for each of those that isn't really written up anywhere else in any guidance that I've ever seen, and I've looked. So I'm really just struggling with the FDA's asking for something that's not mainstream usability testing. It's unique to them, and I think it's something that's evolved out of the drug side of the industry. And so I'm just looking for a good way to present that. But if people think that that's going to work to still have it be a section of the guidance, or maybe it's an annex at the end, giving examples of how to do things differently for OTC products, that might be a good approach.
Hey, Rob, one of the problems you're going to have with the FDA is the whole amenable to self-diagnosis definition, because they will absolutely fry you if you're going to claim. And it's a very nebulous thing too. If I can self-diagnose, I have a headache. I know I have a headache. Do I need to take an aspirin? Sort of thing. They're going to make the claim. Well, how do you know that's not a brain tumor? And then it's like not amenable to self-diagnosis. So you have those kind of instances all the time. So it's almost a losing battle. You can try to say, okay, this is at OTC because, but you have to have all those studies to say, to Alex's point, it's easy to be misused, but what's the risk if they misuse it? How many different kind of ways can you misuse it? And what's the risk of that? You got to do that iterative back and forth all the way down till you've pretty much exhausted it. And you have to get ahead of at least the FDA. I don't know so much about the commission on that. I haven't really had to work with them, but the notified bodies really seem to use a very commonsensical approach. So I almost appreciate the Europeans saying, we're going to be detailed, but we have a common sense approach. Whereas the FDA is saying, listen, over-engineer it as best you can and make sure you answer all the questions, no matter what it is, and no matter what we can think of, we're going to go to the illogical end. And if you can answer all those questions, then okay, we can go with this as an OTC. But it still comes down to whoever your auditor is, whoever the regulatory person is, can still say, no, I don't agree with that, so you can't have it that way.
Yeah.
So it's almost a political thing at some point in time. You have to do your best, do the best job you possibly can, but it still comes down to whatever their fears, whatever their politics are, whatever their firm beliefs are, and it's very hard to get that strict definition. So I don't really know how successful you're going to be at that unless you've got a good relationship with somebody who's got the power to make that decision and agree with you. And if you can get it in writing, then you got a hope in hell of getting this passed.
Yeah, I agree. That's what I'm a little concerned about. Is there is the FDA is a little bit less reasonable, and particularly in the diagnostic realm. I'm going to go on to the next slide so we can hopefully finish most of this before Goldie has to go. So risk analysis, most people are familiar with the first example here of DFMEAs or FMEAs. This one has detection on it. I don't want people to get lost in the details of these. I just picked 3 screen captures. That's all I did. But this is what most people are familiar with. The second example here is what's in the FDA draft guidance. They say you shall have this. I spoke with Hannah B. Wire, and he said, you can take your use FMEA and copy the columns of that into this document. We're not asking you to redo it. You just copy the fields over into the template we're giving you. But we do not want you to give us anything more than this. We do not want you to give us anything less than this. The reason why is because for every single product that comes to the FDA for a device, we have to do a traceability analysis for every single thing you did in your usability study to make sure you've adequately validated your risk controls. And we don't have time to learn how you did your risk analysis. We want you all to do it the same, so we don't have to think. And he didn't add that last part, so we don't have to think. But that's what he meant. We don't want to learn what you did. We just want you to do what we ask. And I appreciate that. That makes it so much easier if everybody does it the same way, with the same chart, the same labels, the same information. It makes it so much easier for them to review. So I think that's probably a good way to do it. That's not necessarily meaning that's how you're going to do your original risk analysis, but that's how you're going to submit it to the FDA because that's what they want. What I have come to realize recently is that this fault tree actually has a very useful tool specifically for use errors that all the other tools don't have. And it's because of these and or decision points. When you have an and feature, so both of these have to occur in order for the use error to occur, that takes into account if I have 3 or 4 or 5 different risk controls to prevent people from doing stupid things, they're less likely to happen because all of those would have to fail in order for it to occur. But the way an FMEA works is I have to cover each of those individually. And so each one might only have a 10% chance of being successful, but collectively, I've got so many risk controls, it's really going to be hard to make that mistake. And so I think the fault tree analysis, because it has an and function, you could have multiple risk controls in conjunction for the same use error or potential use error, and it prevents it just because you have so many risk controls that are redundant. And so that's one of the things I like. The second reason why I like to really focus on using fault trees is because it's a top-down approach. So when you hear about a use error from a customer and they allege that the device was faulty, but you think there was a use error, it goes from that top-down approach. So they told me this happened. What things could have caused that? Could it have been a mechanical failure? Could it have been a software failure? Could it, like if we're doing diagnostic, could it be in some problem with the buffer? Could it be past the expiration? All these different things. But it allows you to use a top-down approach to do your investigation of root cause for why it happened. And I think it's a better tool for complaint investigations. Maybe not what people are used to, but if the FDA used it in an example in their first ever guidance, because they've been saying you can use other tools, but they never demonstrate how to use the other tools. It'd be really nice to maybe show people, here's how you can use a fault tree in usability as another method other than FMEAs. And here's how it really has some benefits if you're doing an investigation or why this use error might have caused this failure. This tool can help you and it can show you how multiple risk controls could have prevented it. So that was my thinking behind presenting a different approach to risk analysis. But does anybody have any strong feelings like, this URRA, I hate it and it's absolutely useless. We love use FMEAs and we never want to part from them, or fault trees the best thing since sliced bread. Any strong opinions, or whatever you said, Rob?
Yes, there is something clarified in the 1497119 version. What exactly you should do with the FMEA? It's really, you don't need really to make your own thoughts and get lost, because I have also this feeling. I met various FMEAs during the career. The meaning is only that you filtrate the harms. That is, it is very clear described how you should do it. These steps. I have tried to explain that with very easy words. Yeah.
Goldie?
Yeah, you have to keep in mind that the usability study is giving you a very limited opportunity to see failures. I mean, fault tree, if you propose something like that, you are now looking at people to come up with simulations to get to that failure. So then see what user do, right? How do you study that? That makes this design very, very complex. When I design usability, I am literally like tasks is my focus. And each task in a clinical workflow, I'm looking for what hazards I have identified in my system, risk management system. And I link those two. And then I create either a simulation to fail that, or to pass that, or to have a close call. And that design is so intricate. Like, it's like, if you don't design it right, then your user will not do it right. Or if they do it wrong, and then now you have to come back with your justification to FDA as a sponsor, what would you do? So you may come back another cycle to test that.
Yeah. Just like aerospace has simulators that throw failures at a pilot and see if they make the right choice or they make a use error and how they're supposed to respond to that.
Exactly.
Things like hydraulic failures or mechanical failures or.
Yes.
Hey,
Yeah. So
Goldie, may I ask a question?
yes, please.
If you have a fault, do you chase those all the way down to its downstream consequences in each of your scenarios?
Only user related where intervention may occur. If it fails safe, I won't.
Okay, so you don't care that there are. I'm not saying you don't care. I'm not saying that.
I do.
I guess you're not as concerned about downstream consequences or long-term consequences of downstream failures from a particular hazard that shows up. And how
Not
would you
at-
track something like that without, like what Rob's got here is basically a modified Ishikawa. If you think
Yeah.
about it, this is
Yeah.
your fault tree analysis, and it gives you your downstream consequences, and you can free float back and forth, up and down. How would you do that in your scenario if you didn't have something like this?
Yeah, good question. For usability, I narrow it down in two scenarios. One, user has to intervene to protect patient or proceed in doubt and harm patient. That's the scenario you have. The second part is 100% covered in a design process, design FMEA, process FMEA, and probably other risk controls you have through the lab testings you do, right? I cannot possibly study all that as a user interface. I am calling all that fail safe. So if something happens in design and user cannot do anything and it's like a failure to treat, I'm still safe because I did not harm patient. Right?
Okay, so you're risk stratifying the different levels of risk here to say, basically, high, I have to do something about it. So this is much more concerning than medium. It could happen and could cause a failure, but it's not going to cause patient harm. And then lastly, you would have obviously just, well, it happened, no patient problems, no user problems. Maybe the thing can't work, but you could just throw it away and grab another one, kind of a thing, right? So you're risk stratifying these things. Okay, I see. But how do you do that without going through each of these analyses?
You do. I'm running out of my time, but you really do. I love this discussion. There is a boundaries you create for each process, right? If you have those scenarios in a design risk that you are mitigating, you create a boundary. Is like to what extent this probability needs to be addressed. And that's a design control. If
but that's numerical, or is that numerical, or is it something else?
It's those risk tables where you say you are, in a red, yellow, and green zone. You cannot be in a yellow zone these days. Like you have to do probability down to somewhere green, right? So those are numerical, yes. Yes.
Thank you very much for
guys.
your participation, Goldie.
Yeah.
Have a great day.
Thank you. Bye.
In the interest of time, I'm going to go on to the next one, and I'd be happy to call you, Rick, if you want to discuss further. This one, the FDA says specifically you shall do a search for known use errors. If you have an existing product on the market, that's relatively easy because you have your own post-market data, you have a product code already established, you can use that device as a predicate. That becomes very simple. For de novo products where you don't have a product code, where the use errors would be more important to determine and search for, the MAUDE database is a horrible tool to use. And depending on what features your device has, trying to find another device with that feature, you might find a device that has 10,000 or 20,000 potential MAUDE reports. When you've got 10, 20,000 MAUDE reports to go through, trying to find the use errors in that is not easy. So we've developed some methods for sampling. We've purchased some tools for post-market surveillance, and those help us do this search. But I think some guidance on how to do the search when you have devices without a product code would be very helpful for PMAs and de novos. And I think it would be really helpful to know what would the minimum be an expectation for a 510K. And unfortunately, the guidance right now is telling you to go search in some databases that are obsolete, like MedSun. MAUDE is really where everything is located. And when you do a search in MAUDE and you do a search in TPLC, they don't even match. So it's just further evidence that the FDA's MAUDE database is broken. But it's what you have. So you use it to search. A lot of people think this is a waste of time. Doesn't add any value, isn't necessary. I just went through this exercise with a client that has a physiological monitor. we did this exercise. They didn't think it was going to be useful. They identified 26 new use areas they had not considered. And they already had a product on the market that was 4th generation. So they were making the 5th generation product, and they identified 26 new use errors. And of those, most of those were class 1 recalls. So, and we're not going to stop having this physiological monitor on the market because it's how we measure hearts. I'll share that much. You know, if it is the tool that everybody uses, we're not going to stop using it, but to have that many class 1 recalls is frightening.
Well, this also comes down to, Rob, this also comes down to your benefit risk ratio too, right?
Yeah.
It's, you have to do this. 14971 basically says line by line, you have to go through, you have to identify the risk. If there's nothing you can do about it, yeah, you may have to have a recall if it's product related. But if it happens and you understand that it happens and you're okay with this and the risk, the benefit outweighs the risk. Much like Viagra kills people every year, they were able to slap a warning label on their box and they got away with it. So,
yep.
FDA doesn't say you can't kill people. It just says, okay, give me a reason to allow you to let this product on the market.
Yep. Yeah. But this is an area where I think we've got a really good handle on how to explain this to people, but examples are the key. We have specific examples and things to show people, but we had some great successes with a couple of clients on this. One I gave as an example in particular, but if anybody's interested, we're actually doing a training on this next Thursday. The next item, there's a lot of people do hazard identification by answering the questions that used to be in 14971. Now they're in 24971. Here's the first question, but it asks a whole bunch of questions to help you brainstorm potential hazards that you hadn't thought of. So I was wondering, nobody's ever created one of these for use errors, but I was wondering if that approach people really like for brainstorming hazards. Would they like a similar approach for use errors? It could be like an annex. Here's Annex B, and it's a whole bunch of questions that help you brainstorm use errors based on what the most common ones are that the FDA sees.
I think you have to be very careful that it doesn't end up like a checklist. Like you have a set of questions and people put them in a checklist and we've checkmarked all the questions.
Yeah,
I
yes.
agree completely with that. That's when I teach this, I say, do not just use this as your hazard analysis only. This is just step 1 of a 4-step process. So you have to go through the whole process, and post-market surveillance is part of it. Identifying hazards that are listed in the standard for your type of device is another one. Going through the different categories of potential hazards that exist. That's another approach. There are lots of them, but I agree. People use it as a checklist. They only do that. I answered the 34 questions. I'm done now. And I answered them all no.
And
Okay, but what else are you going to do for people who want to get out of doing work? They're going to create a checklist. They're going to say we did this, and they're going to say that, we went through the process. There's very few people are going to do a deep dive or do more than they have to. I mean, let's be real. People still have to sell product. Companies still have to make money. Companies still have to keep the lights on. They're going to be pushing products out there, and the FDA is going to say, "Did you do your due diligence?" They're going to say, "Yes, we did our due diligence." And then, how do you prove otherwise until something happens out there in the real world? It gets back as a complaint, and then you run through the complaint process and perhaps a field action or a CAPA or some sort of correction inside a design. You really don't know until it gets out in the world, out in the wild, something happens, and then now you've got some sort of tracking back to at least the MAUDE database, but internally you've got to go to the company. It's a very deep dive. It's hard to get through all of this without it actually in some way, shape, or fashion becoming a checklist. You know what I mean?
I agree. Yeah, it's a balancing act. You either give them a tool that they use to game the system, or you give them a tool that they can't understand, or they misuse every tool you give them.
Yeah, but also the other way around. If they start free thinking, they come up with the most outrageous, improbable risks.
Oh, I'm sure we all have stories.
And and then you have to
I'm a
make
consultant, and I bet I can
rationales, how to
cook this
mitigate
up
them.
for 8 hours of work.
Hey, Robert, administratively, we've lost a third of our viewers.
Okay.
Which is not unusual. I'm hoping that Alex will put your hand down. Just show us, because I think you have 5 more slides. Clearly, this is a rich topic. Of course, we'll have you any week if you're willing to come back. And I like very much the uniqueness of this conversation. We're talking about how to influence a guidance versus how to interpret it for ourselves. How to do something for ourselves. This is a collaborative effort for industry, which I especially appreciate. Would you kindly take us just straight through the last couple of slides? We'll share it in the group and tell us kind of what we're hoping for so that people can ruminate on it and get back to you.
Yep. So in usability, one of the things that was commented earlier is it'd be really great if we had like a checklist of what documents BSI wants or what documents the FDA wants. Well, this is my stab at that. I came up with 6 documents, and the last one's other. So it's really five attachments. You have a use specification that's required right now in the usability standard. Evidence of your search for known use errors, and that how they did it is up to them, but you're asking for evidence of it. So it's very open-ended how they could do it, but you need to provide evidence. The third one is a task analysis. Not telling them how it has to be formatted or what it needs to look like, but you need to show evidence that you've done this clinical task analysis. The next one, the use-related risk analysis, they've already said this is what format we want it in. The Europeans don't want it in that format. So, but you still have to have some sort of risk analysis documented for usability, for a usability engineering file. And then your summative usability protocol report and raw data. Those are the first 5, and then the last one's other. And the FDA has red bars on the left-hand side for the required ones and gray bars for the optional ones. So you put red bars next to the first 5 and you put a gray bar next to the last one so they can attach other stuff that might not fit, like formative testing. And of course, you'd have help guidance that would walk them through each one, but I was trying to keep it as simple as I possibly could, and this was the simplest I could get. And I was looking for feedback on this, and certainly can add detail, but can't really take much away. The last thing I thought of, and this was just thinking one day, I was like, every single FDA guidance document is black and white. Every single one. And because none of them are actually printed ever, it occurred to me that it's possible they could print them in color or add color. I know that there are some people that are colorblind out there that wouldn't benefit from that. But on the other hand, there might be some benefit to adding color. I don't know if that is just strictly against the law of all FDA guidance. You must be in black and white to not hurt those people that are colorblind, but it was just an idea that maybe a little color might be nice once in a while. And then my last slide was just, here's how you can contact me. It's medicaldeviceacademy.com. We also have a new URL that we've started building. We haven't made it public yet, but everybody in our company now has FDAEstar.com email addresses and my phone number. You can use that as WhatsApp if you're in Europe, and you can always schedule an appointment with me. And that's all on my Contact Us page as well for Medical Device Academy. So that's the feedback we're looking for. Thank you very much, Joe, for giving me an opportunity to present the slides and go over time as always. I don't think I've ever finished on time.
Thank you very much, really.
There's a reason for that. They love you. They can't get enough.
Virtual reality, you pull out the hook as easily.
No, I don't know if I'd agree with that. Next week, Anna Brown, U10X alumni, you may remember, is our scientific friend who's leading a company in the radiation shielding market, and she has an update for us. And in much the same spirit Rob did today, we can collaboratively help her think through some things. So see you then, and make it a great week. Thank you, Robert.
Bye-bye, everybody.
Bye.
Bye-bye. Super.